Today we're going to be working on the beautiful Dahlia 3-layer flower. This one has been extremely popular and I've had a lot of people ask for the pattern, and by the popularity on the blog I think people are finding it and saving it for their own crochet adventures. So today what we're going to do, we're going to make it in 3 colors. The picture that I'm showing you right now, this one obviously is done in the one color with kind of the shabby chic pink, and then this second one is done with the 2 colors in the lavender and the green. We're going to work ours today in lavender, pink, and yellow. So let's get started with that. I'm going to be using an H hook, and the first layer, or that I call it, or basically it's the center of the flower. This one is done with the magic circle. So you take your yarn, make your magic circle. Again, as I said, we're using an H hook, but you could really use any hook that you wanted to try to get a smaller or larger effect. But anyway, here we have our magic circle. I'm going to do 1 chain to kind of lock that in place, and then this particular flower has a double crochet center, and we're going to do 12 double crochets. If again you need any help remembering how to do these and would like to have this go a little bit slower, you can refer back to my videos either on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, or on my blog at Lakeview Cottage Kids. Here we've got 3 double crochets. And again, on the blog, the video tutorials talk about the magic circle, and they talk about the various stitches, and double crochet is certainly included in that. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need 5 more double crochets for our center. Now, as in the future days here, I'm going to be putting together some variations on this same pattern. For example, using half double crochets in the center, using treble crochets in some of the petals. But in this case, it's double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there we have our 12 double crochets. And with our magic loop, magic circle, we're going to find the end of our yarn, pull that snugly so that we get our center, come around, and what we want to do is work in the top of the first double crochet and slip stitch that together and do 1 chain so that we kind of lock that in place. That's how we do the center. Next, once we have that finished, we're going to cut up and leave about 4 or 5 inches just to be able to have enough yarn to work the ends in. And again, just once you've cut the yarn, then just pull up with your crochet hook, pull that tight, and that will secure your center. Now the next thing that we want to do is attach our second color of yarn for our first row of petals. So we find the double crochet right to the right of where our yarn was fastened off from the first color on the center. Put your crochet hook right into the top of that double crochet. Take your second color, and in this case ours is going to be lavender. Leave about 3 or 4 inches on the end dangling down. Pull through a loop, and be sure you have the long end of your yarn. And now we're going to be starting to make the next row, which is going to be the base of our first layer of petals. So to do that, we're going to do 3 chains. Then we're going to skip 1 double crochet and do a slip stitch into the next. And this is what we're going to do all the way around. So it's going to be 3 chains, skip a double crochet, slip stitch into the next. 3 chains, skip a double crochet, go into the next one, slip stitch, chain 3, skip, and go into the top of the next double crochet. So far we're looking like this. Chain 3, skip a double crochet, go into the top of the next and do a slip stitch. Chain 3, skip a double crochet and go into the top of the last double crochet. And then finally you want to just slip stitch into the very base of the beginning chain that we did for this row and kind of bring it all together. And if you look closely, what you have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chain 3 spaces that we're going to use for the base of our first layer of petals. Now the next thing that we want to do is to start filling in our petals, and we're going to take and do a slip stitch right into the first chain 3 space that we created. Okay, so the next part that we're going to do is actually fill in the petals on this first layer. We're going to end up with 6 petals here, and what we're doing is we're going to do a slip stitch into our first chain 3 space. So we have our slip stitch, chain 2, and now we're going to put 2 double crochets in that same chain 3 space. There's our 2 double crochets. Make the other side of the petal with 2 chains and now slip stitch into the same chain 3 space, and there we have our first petal. Going to the second one, and I'll work all of the petals in the whole flower with you. We're going to go in the second chain 3 space and slip stitch, 2 chains, 2 double crochets, and that petal with the 2 chains and slip stitch in the same chain 3 space. Third petal, slip stitch, 2 chains, 2 double crochets in the same space, 2 chains, and a slip stitch in that same chain 3 space. Same with the next one, slip stitch, 2 chains, 2 double crochets, kind of get my yarn untangled a little bit, and then end the side of it with the 2 chains and the slip stitch in the chain 3 space. 4 petals down. Slip stitch into the 5th chain 3, 2 chains, 2 double crochets, chain 2, slip stitch in the same, and then to our last petal, slip stitch in the 6th chain 3, 2 chains, 2 double crochets, chain 2, and slip stitch. And there we have our 6 petals. Now it looks like it's a little bit more open right here, so what you want to do is go to the base of your first chain 3 of the very first petal. That slip stitch right there is where you want to go in with your hook, yarn over for a slip stitch, and kind of slip stitch the whole thing and kind of tighten it up. Once you have that, do a chain to kind of lock it down, and then we're done with our second color. And I've already cut some of this yarn, so I'm just going to pull through so that the whole thing can kind of be locked down. And there we have center in color A, color B for our first row of petals, and next we're going to be attaching color C to do our third ruffly set of petals all the way around. Now the next part of the flower, we're going to find the slip stitch and where we just ended off our second color of yarn, and we want to put our hook right into that. It's right between the two petals, the last one and the first one. Take our third color, color C yarn, yarn over and pull through a loop. Okay, so we have our loop pulled through, and just do one little chain there to kind of lock it in, and so that you have some maneuvering space to turn this around. Now this is probably the trickiest part. You turn the whole flower from front to facing the back of the flower. Okay, so once you've done that, what you see is the back of the petal, first petal, and you see the chain 2 and then the 2 double crochets, the chain 2. Down at the very bottom of those chains are the base that we did in row 2. What we want to do is go into that base, right? We just skip over the chain 2, go into the base, and do a slip stitch like that. And what we're actually doing on the back side of this flower is we're making the base for the next row of petals. So what we're going to do is now chain 3, and then you skip the 2 double crochets from petal 1 and go right between the second double crochet and the chain 2, find the base, go in there and do a slip stitch. And what you can see is that you've made another chain 3 space. That's going to be for our first petal. Do chain 3, and so you skip the 2 chains of the first petal, skip the 2 chains of the second petal, and go in between the chain 2 and the first double crochet of the second and do a slip stitch. There's our second chain 3 space. Remember we had 6 petals on the first row of petals? We're making it so we can have twice as many, or 12 petals here. So now we're doing chain 3 again. Skip, kind of flatten out your work if it seems hard to find out where you are. Skip the 2 chains right between the second chain and the chain 2 of that petal. Find the base, yarn over and slip stitch. Now we've got the 3 bases for the first 3 petals of the last row. Chain 3, always remember to do that. Skip the last chain of this petal, skip the first 2 chain 2s of this petal, go into the base and slip stitch. Should look kind of lacy with your your 4 different chain 3s. Now chain 3 again, skip the 2 double crochets, go into the base, slip stitch, chain 3, skip the 2 chain here on this petal, skip the chain 2 here, find the base, do a slip stitch, chain 3, skip the 2 double crochets, go down to the base between the last double crochet and the chain 2, slip stitch. See how ruffly it's getting here. That's our base. Chain 3, skip this chain 2 of the last petal, skip the chain 2 of the next petal, go into the base, slip stitch, chain 3, skip the 2 double crochets, find the base, slip stitch, chain 3, skip the chain 2 of this petal, skip the chain 2 of the next petal, go into the base, slip stitch. We're getting close to the end, and count at this point how many of these base chain 3 spaces you have. We have 1, 2, 3. I'll get these yarns out of the way, we can see it better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we need 2 more. And the way that happens is, again, we do our chain 3, skip our 2 double crochets, go into the base, slip stitch. So we have 11. And now the last one, chain 3. Kind of try and keep all of your little ends out of the way. And now we're going to go into the base where we first started, right where we had the slip stitch in the very first petal. And there they are. Okay, do 1 chain, kind of to set yourself so that everything's kind of staying in place. And now we're going to fill in our 12 ruffly petals of the last row. And the way we do that is we go into the first, what we want to do, and this is in bold on your pattern, and we want to make sure that you remember, I almost forgot, we want to turn the entire project around, because remember we're looking at the back for this last row. For this row, the finishing row, we want to turn everything back so that we are in the front of the flower. So what we do is we go into the first chain, slip stitch, and now we're going to do chain 2, and then we're going to work 3 instead of 2, 3 double crochets into each chain 3 around. So it's going to be 3 double crochets into that chain 3 spot, and then chain 2, slip stitch into the same space, and there's our first petal of this last row. Okay, so now we are ready for the next petal. Put our hook into the second chain 3 space, slip stitch, chain 2, and now 3 double crochets into this chain 3 space. Once we get our chain 3, double crochets, 3 of them, we do chain 2 and slip stitch into the same space. Now we have our 2 petals starting our last row. Get some of my yarn all pulled out here. Now we go into the next chain 3 space with a slip stitch, chain 2, 3 double crochets, chain 2, slip stitch into the same chain 3 space. And you can see how things are starting to come together. Slip stitch into the next chain 3 space, 2 chains, 3 double crochets, 2, 3, chain 2, slip stitch into the same. Now if you want to kind of just pull your first row of petals back so you can see better, that's certainly a possibility, and I'll try to do that here too so you can see a little better. Next petal, slip stitch into the next chain 3 space, chain 2, 3 double crochets. And now our chain 2. Next one, slip stitch in, chain 2, 3 double crochets. There's 2, there's 3, and now 2 chains. And our slip stitch into the same. And you can see how this is starting to come together. It's looking like our flower. And we'll keep going. By now you're probably an expert at this, so you may want to just go at your own speed. Those of you who want to crochet right along with me, go right ahead. But by now you are probably very good at getting this all together, and you may be all done by the time I'm getting to the next one. But again, I'm going to kind of go through the whole thing, so if you're a little hesitant or you just want to crochet together, we'll do that. So we go into the next one, slip stitch, chain 2, three double crochets, two chains, slip stitch. I don't know about you, but I get real excited when everything starts looking like it's supposed to. And in this case, we are getting very close to having it finished. So we'll go into the next chain 3 space, 2 chains, 3 double crochets, chain 2 into the same space with a slip stitch into the next one, chain 2, 1 double crochet, 2 and 3, slip stitch into the next one. Again, chain 2, 3 double crochets, second one, third one, chain 2, slip stitch. Okay, we have one more to go. And here we are getting closer. Slip stitch into the chain 3, 2 chains, and 1, 2, and 3 double crochets, and then our last chain 2, and our slip stitch into the chain 3 space. And once again, to kind of hook everything together, go into the slip stitch at the beginning of the chain 2 of the first petal, and just go underneath that slip stitch together, and then chain 1. And then I would cut off again about 20 inches or so, whatever you're comfortable with. You can always, if you don't have enough to sew everything on, you can always use another strand of yarn to do that. But that puts everything together, kind of like flatten things out the way you want it. And now what you'll end up doing is you want to work in the ends I'll show working in the ends in another video, but you work your ends in except for your real long sewing end. You can kind of tighten up the middle of your flower like so, and you're ready to sew that on. And again, I'll have another video about sewing this particular one on, and I think you'll find that it's kind of a helpful video, because you can kind of have a lot of choices of how to sew this one on. But there it is, our pretty dahlia, and in this case it's done in some really pretty pastel colors, ready to put on a nice cute baby hat. Thank you, and this again is Chris Long from Lakeview Cottage Kids.